Hello, good evening, and welcome to VHS Book Club. Really pleased you could join us this evening. I'm your host, Dr. Warren, the school psychologist. Really pleased to welcome you to episode 1, where we're going to be discussing our book of the year. A major coup for the first episode of the show. We have live in the studio Rhianon, the author of the Neurodivergence Skills Workbook for Teens. That's been a major hit in the school Senko department. More about that later. But yeah, just for those that don't know, VHS TV Book Club is a mini series of 6 or 7 episodes where we'll be talking about the best books about neurodiversity and young people's mental health. We are so excited to have Rhianon in the studio talking about our book of the year. More about that later. And as well, at the end of the show, as usual, we will have our competition with some fantabulous prizes. But first, a message for our sponsor. We just want to do a shout out to Roberto, Europe's greatest school chef, wishing you a speedy recovery. We look forward to seeing you riding back into school on your motorbike. That fantastic motorbike. I'm not jealous. Anyway, moving on to the main bit of the show. I am so pleased to have Rhianon with us in the studio. As you will have seen in the school newsletter, this was a book that personally I've been waiting for years, that really seeks to put tools in the hands of young people so they can make their own decisions about how they navigate their identity and mental health. But we'll get into the weeds of all of that. So yeah, welcome, Rhianon.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here. I have really enjoyed our correspondence so far, and I'm so honored to be the book of the year.
Oh, well done. Congratulations on that. Yeah,
Thank you.
really pleased to have you. I wonder if you could just say a bit about where you're joining us from and a bit about your work role and a bit about you, if that's okay.
Sure. Yeah. So I am joining you from Ashland, Oregon, on the west coast of the United States. It's a small town in the mountains, and we have one of the things I love a lot about it is we have a very big theater scene. We have the Oregon Shakespeare Festival here with our own version of the Globe Theater. And I am working here in a private practice. I work with teenagers, I work with adults. I have worked in schools and medical clinics and all sorts of settings before, but right now I get to do one-on-one work with teenagers and adults, and I really love that. So I I've been in the profession for about 15 years, and so much has changed, right, in the profession, especially even the concept of neurodivergence coming more to the forefront, right? So I like am also a multiply neurodivergent people. I realize that most of the clients that I enjoyed working with are neurodivergent. Most Probably a lot of the folks, we're on the autism spectrum, really resonate with that, but certainly love the wide range of neurodivergence as it presents itself. And I think it's a very exciting idea and a necessary one for our world.
Oh, thanks for that introduction. Yeah, one thing I have to apologise about. Unfortunately, we didn't have a walk-on music budget. So what we ask all our wonderful guests on the show is if you were going to have some walk-on music for this interview, what might you've picked today?
Okay, so I've been listening a lot to the band Idols, and so I'd probably pick their song Dancer as my walk-on music because
Um,
it's got a really good energy to it.
Okay, go check that out. Check that out on Spotify. There are other providers. So let's get into talking about this book. So could you say a bit about why did you write this book, and were there any particular hopes for it?
Yeah, I think I wrote the book. Partly it was I kind of in some ways think of this as if somebody was going to work with me as a therapy client, this would be almost like the Rhiannon 101, like the basic course of things that we would go through. And I found these tools so personally helpful and helpful for the people I work with, and I just wanted to make them more accessible, right? Not everybody has the interest or the ability to engage in therapy, and I wanted this to be something that people could pick and choose from what works for them. The other piece that I really was interested in is, so I work largely from a DBT, dialectical behavioral therapy approach. And one of the big dialectics in DBT is change and acceptance, right? And I think for most of time, and still is very prevalent idea, neurodivergent folks have been told, hey, you have to change. You have to be the one to fit in here, right? And now we are seeing in more spaces and from more people the idea of acceptance, right? Like, hey, these are natural variations. There's nothing inherently wrong with the way that you are, right? And what I have found is sometimes people get stuck on one side of the dialectic or the other, right? I can't accept myself. Who I am is not good. I'm different from the norm. Even sometimes in families that are very affirming themselves, I see, people who want to be like everybody else, right? So they're stuck on the change. I also sometimes see people who are, okay, I've accepted and things are still hard. What can I do to like have the life that I want to have? I also, sometimes will see people who the acceptance piece is like, this is how I am and I can't change. And even though there's some things that are getting in my way, change isn't possible for me, right? So I wanted people to feel like acceptance is really important, and definitely culturally, at least here in the United States, we need way more acceptance, and also change, right? That both of these things are important for people. So those were kind of my two big hopes. And I guess I would also say this is sort of the book I wish I had had when I was 15. So
Oh,
just kind of
and I
writing it
wish,
for that younger self. Yeah.
yeah, and I wish it was the book I had when I started out in my psychology practice 20
Yeah.
years ago when I was in my early 30s. I know that's hard to believe, but yeah, I was in my early 30s. But this book would have saved me a lot of dead ends. But what I really love about this book is that it doesn't tell young autistic people what to think. But instead, it kind of invites them to make their own decisions about
Mm-hmm.
diagnosis or person first, identity first language. And I wonder if it's okay to ask, how did you find kind of navigating some of those dilemmas that there's loads of, kind of resources to help you with in this book?
Right. Like what informed my thinking as far as that approach, do you mean?
I definitely want to hear of that, but also, you talk about your position as an autistic adult and an autistic young person, having navigated these things, and really keen to, learn from both, your expertise by knowledge and also kind of by experience.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So how I personally navigated some of those dilemmas. Um, I think personally I'm autonomy. Like one of the things I talk about in the book is identifying your values, right? And really coming from there. And so autonomy and choice and trying to empower people is always one of the biggest driving principles that I have in my work with people, right? So for me, it's about thinking through what are your goals, what actually makes sense for you, what are the pros and cons of those decisions, right? Whether it's about diagnosis, which here in the United States has become very contentious in like the political atmosphere that we're in. Hopefully things are better for you all. Things about using the like which language to use. Like I tend to be somebody who likes using identity because I think you know, there's nothing wrong with being neurodivergent, whatever flavors of neurodivergent you are. It's an awesome thing to be. And so I personally like the idea of just embracing and saying, yes, this is what I am, right? I'm autistic, I'm sensitive, I'm um, you know, that is more of my preference for that. And I think I totally get the reasons why people don't like that language, or that might be something that they don't want to arrive at. I know there's also some forms of neurodivergence that people are like, I don't feel very empowered around this identity. And to me, it's always about autonomy and choice. I tend to be just sort of in my thinking clinically, personally, politically, that like being more open and out about who we are is something that benefits everybody and is a way to find pride in ourselves and feel that sense of like Yeah, just pride, I would say. I think that's really important for not trying to hide who we are, and instead just to be like, normalize all of the differences that exist in our society. So that's sort of what informed my thinking about that.
And what I was really drawn to in what you said, are you saying we're having these discussions in a particular time of a particular politics and culture, and sadly, it's
Yeah.
the same sort of thing over here where debates become polarized. Interestingly,
Mm-hmm.
the Oxford Dictionary word of the year is kind of rage bait, and this emotion
Oh,
driven talk means people think you can take sides, where I always thought I can have multiple positions on things and maybe I'll change my
right,
mind. And you know, as a young person, you're
right.
allowed to change your mind.
Totally. Yeah, yeah,
Uh,
and I think a big part of it, yes, is respecting other people's positions and understanding where they're coming from. I have certainly seen and talked to a lot of people who say, "Hey, if somebody says I have autism, that means that they're against autistic people, or that they, and really, you just really have to respect where people are in their identity development and what makes sense for them." So,
Yeah, and what I like in the book is that you talk people through this information and they can make a decision. I think it's also really helpful for parents to think through this, because I think as a parent of a child with special educational needs and disability, your life is so busy with appointments, chasing up things, trying. It's really
hmm
hard to keep top of the information when it's kind of changing, and I think
hmm
that
hmm
there's a real source for that. And so I wondered, just to ask you on that point, you
hmm
know, what would be your tips for parents and carers around support for autistic youth with issues around whether it's sensitivity or demand avoidance or sensory stuff?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think I think it's, for one thing, I always want to start with parents, right? Is about having compassion for yourself. I think there can often, and what I see so much in parents is like, there can be this sense of shame or grief about, oh, if I had only known this earlier about my kid. Or maybe your kid is somebody who was identified really early on, but you don't understand what the whole spectrum of it means, right? Like, I think about, I've known a lot of people who were identified pretty early on as having ADHD, but what they got told is like a very narrow slice of what that encompasses, right?
Mm.
So I just want to encourage people to have, you knew what you knew when you knew it, right? So because I often see a lot of like guilt and self-blame, and like, oh, if I had only known, my kid wasn't trying to be difficult. My kid was just really struggling with sensory information, and I would get mad at them, right? So trying to have some self-compassion, I think, is important. I think, especially if we're talking about autistic folks, so often autonomy is a really strong driving principle for autistic people. So I think that collaborating as much as possible with your kid to understand what do they actually need. And, this is my personal inclination, probably one reason why I'm drawn to being like a DBT therapist, right, is don't just look at the behavior, try to understand what is underneath it, right? um don't just look at, okay, my kid is freaking out, and they're just being difficult or whatever, right? Okay, let's help the kid start to develop understanding. What was it that made it so hard for you to be in that environment, right? Let's analyze the behavior, understand what the needs are underneath. I also think that a big part of this for everybody, right, is dropping expectations about what things are supposed to look like, right? That
Mm.
though often get in our way, like what a family meal is supposed to look like, that we're supposed to have family meals, right? Maybe that doesn't work for every family. So I think trying to, again, I always go back to values, right? Like, what is your value? Okay, if your value is around your family feeling really connected to each other, then what are the things that actually promote that? Not what we see on TV or what we've been told culturally promote that, but like what actually works for our family. So those are some of the things that I tend to talk to a lot about, parents.
Oh, thank you. Really helpful. And you were thinking about the wider environment there, and I'm just thinking, for so long, young autistic people have been blamed or pathologized for the
Hmm.
difficulties they encounter in school, rather than looking at, how disabling this environment is. And I wonder,
Right.
how could teachers or teaching assistants use the exercises or ideas in this book to promote, kind of neuro-inclusive environments in school?
Yeah, and I really appreciate that question. And I think, that idea that how disabling the environment can be, I find so often that our sensitive and neurodivergent kids are sort of like the canaries in the coal mine. It's like maybe the environment is not great for a lot of people, but they can cope better with the demands to, sit at a desk all day at one spot and be focusing on what somebody is saying at the front of the classroom. But it's actually maybe something that isn't a great environment for most people. It's just that some of our neurodivergent kids are the ones who are more clearly signaling that. Um, so part of me, I'm very aware of how many demands teachers and folks who work in schools are under already. And so part of me, I hesitate to add more to that, right? Because I
Mm.
know, at least, working in schools and volunteering in schools here, um, how many needs teachers are trying to meet. But I guess one thing I would say is, for teachers is, I often get the question from teachers like, hey, how would I know if a kid is neurodivergent in my classroom, and what should I do, right? And I would say, and I think your school has this understanding already, right? But like, just assume that there are neurodivergent kids in your schools, right? They are already there. We are already in your classrooms. I think that, again, going back to what is our goal here, what looking at not just at like the external expression of behavior, but what is underneath, and also what is really important. So I think about, at my child's school, they just had their winter concert, and he has this really wonderful music teacher who, every year she sends out this message, reminding us, hey, you have to drop your kids off at this time for the concert. Kids should wear what makes them feel comfortable. For some kids, that will be dress up clothes. For some kids, that will be what they wore at school that day. And at this school, there's plenty of kids who are walking in their pajamas, right? So I really appreciate that. It's about, hey, we want kids to show up if they're able to and participate in community in a meaningful way. What they look like is not actually the most important thing. So I always want people to think about, like, what are we ultimately trying to get at here? Is it an event that everybody is, as much as possible, people are feeling good and comfortable about showing up? Or is it we want kids to be dressed in these very formal clothes? So I think about what is the purpose of that. I also think, sometimes I will talk to, um, teachers or people who work with young folks, and, um, I would say, know that a kid may seem like they are doing really well on the outside, right? They're meeting expectations in school, they're, holding it together, but they may actually be really struggling underneath, right? Don't just assume that what you see on this is what is going on underneath. I think also, a lot of the things we talk about in this book about the importance of sensory regulation, right? These are things, it's not just neurodivergent people who have sensory needs, right? Like, everybody has sensory needs. So if there's
Yeah,
ways,
I've been drinking coffee all the way through this meeting. That's one
right,
of my
right. Yeah, I think about like people who, yeah, I always have the three different types of drinks on my desk, right? There's like water and like coffee,
Oh,
and then
me
a
too.
fizzy water. Yeah, totally. So like, we all have sensory needs. So if there are ways that kids can engage in getting their sensory needs met, and I realize, you don't want it to be too disruptive to the class, right? But, um, encouraging kids to think about that, right? Encouraging kids to take movement breaks, to, and I realize that there's a lot of external structure demands that may make this harder or easier for teachers to do, but really trying to, to get kids thinking about not just, meeting the academic demands, but how am I showing up, right? How can
Mm,
I be in this classroom in a more present way?
yeah.
So doing things that support that. I know at some schools they'll have like sensory break areas and things like that, and just being aware that that's something that's helpful for everybody, not just the kids who have been identified as autistic or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, there was one conceptualization I was really drawn to in the book where you encourage reflection and thinking about kind of demand avoidance and how
Hmm.
it's on a
Hmm.
sort of dimension. And, it's
Right.
interesting because I think often parents who've come through very medicalized settings where, that the
Hmm.
focus is on coming up with a diagnosis rather than long-term support can get focused on some of these research categories like pathological demand
Hmm.
avoidance, which I have
Hmm.
to confess, I'll be transparent, I've always had a beef with because I've always thought, what about the disabling environment? Maybe these young
Hmm.
people are
Hmm.
avoiding demands because the demands are oppressive or
Hmm.
is sort of neurotypically normative or
Hmm.
whatever, or bullying, or
Right.
whatever it might be. And I wonder if you could just say a bit about how maybe parents or staff might support young people around demand avoidance that, to some extent all young people have. I know that there's some young people
Hmm.
in the autistic community that gets in the way of living valued living, but I wonder if you could,
Hmm.
yeah, say a bit about that.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's such a great way you put it. I totally resonate, right? Is that we're looking at it as a problem that is located within the child instead of looking at the environment, right? And is the environment making reasonable demands? Or like
Mm,
I said, I tend to think of a lot of our kids who struggle most in school are often really pointing at problems with the whole system in general. So um, I think about um what are the demands that are being put on a child and or young person, and how necessary are they, right? Sometimes it's really necessary, like if there's a medication that you have to take, like you, you know you have to take that medication. I think working as much as possible with young people to find a way to make that fit into their values, or to understand the necessity of it, is often, I have found, a way to kind of mitigate some of the demand avoidance, right? Being really clear about, why are we doing this thing? Why is it important? It is always, I think it's really easy to fall into this. We as adults might know the reasons for something, but not to communicate it with children. And that does not work for a
I don't
lot
know.
of neurodivergent children, right? So being really clear about why we're asking this, and sometimes that's really illuminating for us as adults as well, right? It's like, wait, why am I asking this of this kid? This isn't actually that important, or this doesn't actually have to happen in this way. um so I think about, for me, and I think a lot of the things in this book, I am always trying to um help help kids develop those critical thinking skills to make decisions for themselves, right? Not just, I'm going to take this medication because that's what my parent told me I had to do, but like, here's why I'm doing it, here's the pros and cons, I've thought through this, right? I always want to empower young people. And so I think a lot, and again, this is my bias, my perspective. I think a lot about pairing with children. And I think that is something that is helpful in general, but especially necessary for neurodivergent kids who
Mm.
are very much often are like, I'm not, you say so, that's not enough of a reason for me.
So my final question, and it relates to the last thing that I really love about this book, is that it brings together and showing links between positive self-identity, neurodivergent identity, enabling environments, and well-being and kind of mental health, and that they're linked, and people need to understand those links. But I just wondered, when you're not writing fabulous books or working in your clinical job, what do you do to support your own well-being and, kind of find fun in life?
Yeah. Thank you. I love that question. Yeah, so I have really embraced that one of the things that I like is a lot of repetitive activities. So I do a lot of knitting. I like the logical progression of it. And, I'm gonna do this knit stitch about 10,000 times on this sweater. Um, I also have I wish I had been sooner, but in the last few years, really, really become more aware of the importance of regular exercise. All those studies that say how important it is for your mental health, well, they were right. I wasn't the exception to that. So I do a lot of uh weightlifting. And one of the things for me, as far as like the unmasking, has really been allowing myself to just embrace without judgment what.
For well-being, and you mentioned doing some weightlifting. Any other things that support your well-being and mental health?
Yeah, I think for me, one thing that's really been huge over the last years is, and I talk about in the book, is special interests. And I think that that is often something that, people people can get like shamed out of or feel social pressure because the special interest is so weird, quote unquote, or like being into something to that level is seen as odd, right? I mean, it depends. I will say, like if you're into college football or something, or basketball to that extent, and you know all the statistics, that's culturally normative here. But being that into other things is seen as unusual and kind of odd. So really allowing myself to just, you know what, I want to listen to this one record and do a deep dive on all of the critical analysis of it. And that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to listen to this record, 10 times over a few days. Then just enjoying that, right? Because that's such a
Yeah, yeah,
sense of pleasure to really delve into that. So
yeah.
those are my main things.
When did a pleasure become a kind of problem? You think about the time that
Right.
we're in this season, excessive interest in shopping and exotic kind of shopping
Right.
options is all the rage. Listen, thank you so much for taking the time to
Yeah.
join us, and
Thank
we
you.
really grateful for having you on the show. So just before we finish, we have it's competition time. We have an amazing prize this episode. There will be a chance to win an all expenses paid tour of the school caretakers workshop with free refreshments, including a mid-range biscuit. And here's the quiz question. I wonder, Rhiannon, if you could give us our drum roll. Thank you. So the question is, which member of the staff team appeared in TV's Stars in Your Eyes? Yeah, the first correct answer to come to the school inbox will win that all expenses paid tour of the caretakers workshop. Yeah, non-winners will not be notified. So we are coming to the end of our first episode. What a bumper show! Book of the year, author of the year, and competitions. But we haven't got time for any more. So it was really grateful that you joined us here on VHS TV Book Club. So it is goodbye from me.
And it's good night from him.
Good night.